So despite snubbing Elon Musk without any real explanation, Labour's secured a record-breaking £63 billion investment in the UK with almost 38,000 jobs. Or has it? Because if you've watched my channel for long enough by now, you'll know that it's not quite as simple as that. So if you want a brutally frank breakdown of what I read in the news, and I'll go back and check previous statements to see whether it's entirely accurate, please do bop that subscribe button, because most of the media probably won't tell you this in exactly the same terms that I will. I am not partisan, meaning I don't take sides. I'm not taking one side or another. I'll attack both sides when they deserve it, and I'll give you what I believe is the frank, honest truth, at least as I see it, and I'll be happy to be proven wrong on occasion. So let's take a look at this, because quite rightly so, this was in a press release to say that this was a record-breaking £63 billion investment with almost 38,000 jobs, which overall is fantastic. And I said as much. I was humble enough to say congratulations to Sir Keir Starmer, and that I look forward to seeing this all being implemented. Somebody did accuse me of being rather sassy, but they might say that, but I couldn't possibly comment. But I do genuinely look forward to seeing this happen, because this really is what the UK needs, and despite not inviting Elon Musk to the table to see what he might have been interested, having indicated such an interest, we'll wait to see what happens. But the real burning question here is, was it really Labour that has raised this £63 billion investment? Because anybody reading this and seeing this flashed all over social media and the headlines might think Labour's done a fantastic job of raising this £63 billion. Now, I don't take any credit away from the fact that they obviously had a fantastic event. They obviously put a lot of work into it. They obviously sat down and they obviously impressed. And these companies were obviously comfortable enough with Labour in charge to make this investment, or these investments. And so I take nothing away from that. And they genuinely have my congratulations, because this is what the country needs. We do need these investments, we do need these jobs, and we do need this to progress and grow this country. So nothing taken away from that whatsoever. What I do have to shine a light on, however, is that it's not entirely as simple as that. So Kevin Hollenrake MP says that this was a shameless attempt to distract from the disastrous first 100 days. Now, we cannot escape the fact that there's been a lot of ups and downs in this first 100 days, lots of different things, prisoners being released, all sorts of stuff that people have disagreed with. But Kevin says, whilst we welcome all investment into the UK, quite rightly so, the vast majority of this £63 billion trumpeted yesterday, he says, is made up of deals already announced as a result of auction rounds commissioned by the previous Conservative government, including Amazon's £8 billion and Blackstone's £10 billion investments. You'll remember that I mentioned that in a previous video, where this was already really set up and organised by Rishi Sunak, although it did come into fruition under Sir Keir Starmer. So let's take a little rundown through some of these, shall we? So if I open this image in new tab, that allows me to zoom in a little bit better. This first one here, this amount of £12 billion. This is Iberdrola saying that it's doubled its planned investment into the UK from 12 to 24 billion over the next 4 years. But on the record, it first invested 12 billion under the last Conservative government and announced that £12 billion of investment during the last Conservative government. That was in November 23. Moving to Ørsted, confirming an investment of £8 billion. And confirming that the government's recent expanded offshore wind auction means that their projects will unlock £8 billion and £2.5 billion in green vault of investment, respectively. But this, apparently, according to this, Ørsted already owns 12 operational wind farms, and the world's largest opened under the last Conservative government. This says Ørsted's investment follows the last Conservative government's decision to increase the strike price by 66%. Den's increased the strike price by 66% to £73 per megawatt hour per offshore wind farms, unlocking investment into Greenbolt and Ørsted. I don't profess to understand what all of that means. All that I take from that is that it was following a decision under the Conservative government. So this is not entirely at the doing of Labour. As I say, I'm not taking away from Labour with getting this to fruition at this investment summit. It's just that there is more context to this. Greenvolt moving on with the £2.5 billion investment here. Greenvolt's investment follows the last Conservative government's decision to increase the strike price again. The SEAH Wind has made an additional $225 million investment into wind technology. And it says this had already secured $650 million of the last Conservative government in Teesside and already invested $650 into wind project, etc. Macquarie supporting $1.3 billion of investment into new green infrastructure. Again, Macquarie Asset Management via Macquarie Green Investment Group Renewable Energy Fund will expand in the presence of the solar sector with an agreement to acquire 50% new stake in Island Green Power. UK's renewable energy developer announced in a press release in March 2022. And this goes on. So lots of these investments have been announced, confirmed one way or another under the previous Conservative government. There is a fantastic thread, which I won't take you through every word of, but this short thread here, credit to Lee Stewart on X at tapas321. Go ahead and drop him a follow. Lee Stewart has a fantastic thread here going through in great detail, pulling out these press releases and bits and pieces that confirm where these investments were first announced. So looking at this one investment here, this £8 billion investment, this one announced by Claire Coutinho on the 17th of October 23. And we open this up. Deal agreed for multi-billion pound data campus. This was April 24. The council's cabinet has agreed a transaction subject to contract with funds agreed, managed by Blackstone, a leading global asset management company, etc., etc. So Lee goes through lots of these, and including the Amazon Web Services, the $8 billion announced in March 24. Again, pulling up references here. So Amazon Web Services, AWS, plans to invest $8 billion in the UK, supporting 14,000 jobs annually. So again, a huge chunk of I presume this is included within the 38,000 job forecast. 14,000 of which reportedly here announced in March 24. Blackstone, again, we've covered that before. £10 billion investment in Northumberland to create the largest artificial data centers in Europe. 4,000 jobs. And again, that was agreed previously, April 2024. And this list goes on. So I just wanted to shine a light on this because if you see these flash up, and this looks a fantastic sort of announcement under this Labour government, not taking away anything from this Labour government for having secured them, because a deal is never done until it's done, as they say. But there are just a few things here that you really need to look at to get the full picture. And this is a fuller picture. So credit to Lee here, and to Kevin Hollenrake MP for shining a light on this. Let me know what you think in the comments. Had you been misled by any of this? Does this surprise you? Does this change the way you think? Let me know. Another issue I'd like to pick up just very quickly here is that this one here over on BBC Breakfast, which I saw this morning at 8 minutes to 9. This interview with Sir Keir Starmer, I don't know if this was recorded at that time, but nonetheless, questions over the increase in the rate of national insurance, whether it's employers or employees, because obviously that makes a big difference. If it's the employee, then it's you as an individual, whether or not your tax national insurance are changing. They say not. But then the other question as to whether the employer's contribution, because obviously employers have a contribution for national insurance. The key question here was whether there was any proposed change in the budget, which we haven't yet had confirmed, whether there's any increase in the rate of national insurance for employers' contribution. And the reason I say that makes a difference is because if there is a huge hike in national insurance for employers, that might make them make a decision. That might make large employers make a decision who've got thousands of employees, and then a percentage increase across thousands of employees is a large increase. They might then decide a huge job cull and lots of people losing their jobs. Now, that will be disastrous in the sense that we are looking to increase jobs, increase investment, increase economic growth. But if I predict here, if there is a huge spike in employer national insurance, then many large employers might decide, well, actually, we can't afford to pay all of this for all of these employees, so we might cut so many thousand jobs. So don't be surprised if that does happen if national insurance for employers goes up. But the real question here was over whether there was a lack of transparency. I suggest not, and I'll explain why just here. This was the interview, first of all. Take a listen to this, first of all.
Did your manifesto rule out increasing any rate of national insurance, employers or employees, or was it merely talking about ruling out increasing the employees' rate?
We were very clear in the manifesto that we wouldn't be increasing tax on working people, and we expressly said that that was income tax, that was NICs, etc. So we set that out in the manifesto.
But NICs just for employees?
Well, it's very clear from the manifesto that what we were saying is we're not going to raise tax for working people.
And so, to be fair, this was pressing Sir Keir Starmer on whether or not there was going to be an increase in national insurance for employers. And so I did go back to look at various sources. This one was obviously the presentation, Manchester, I believe this was. And it was, in my view, very clear that this was aimed at working people. I do have a slight issue with the wording here, which I'll come to in a moment. But Sir Keir Starmer was referring to employees, in my view here, because he sets out very clearly that he's talking about employees. Take a brief listen to this.
Campaign so far into this project, 4.5 years of work, changing our party to put it back in the service of working people. So let me spell it out. We will not raise income tax. We will not raise national insurance. We will not raise VAT. That is a manifesto commitment.
Now, I do have a couple of issues with this. Now, first of all, just to say that I think it was absolutely clear that Sir Keir Starmer was referring to employees in the sense of tax and national insurance and VAT. And so for the vast majority of that, I think that was perfectly clear. I do think there's an issue with raising national insurance for employers that will directly affect workers, but that's besides the point. I don't think he was unclear in that. One thing I do take issue with is that this seems to suggest that there is a stark divide between employees, employers as working people, because the vast majority of businesses are likely to be small to medium businesses which are owned and run and operated by working people. I consider myself to be a working person. I run a business. I'm always working. And from my perspective as a business owner, other business owners would have nothing to look to, for example, for things like maternity and paternity pay, statutory sick pay, and so on. Because if they own the business, then they are working, but they work and own the business. But then if they are then the business owner, then they are going to have to pay any employer increase in national insurance, etc. But they are still working. So this sort of statement really casts a divide between employees and those that own a business. So that's one thing, because there is a large number of individual businesses that are owner-operator businesses, and so those will be affected if there's an increase to employer national insurance, because these rules are going to apply to those businesses as well. So that's one thing. But then also, when he said, the one thing I do starkly disagree with, and I do have quite a strong viewpoint on this, is where he said, and it was quite clear, it was word for word, he said that they will not raise VAT. Let me just play that to you once more.
So let me spell it out. We will not raise income tax. We will not raise national insurance. We will not raise VAT. That is a manifesto commitment.
He made it very clear. He made it clear that he made it very clear that they will not raise VAT. Now, this whole debate with private schools and VAT is a direct contradiction to that very clear manifesto here. So let me be equally clear. Every single parent that pays for private education for their child is doing so as an individual. You cannot write off private education for a child as a business expense, for example, and things like that, they are paying the private school fees and therefore will then be subject to the VAT. So that is in my view, that is a direct contradiction to this manifesto promise and pledge that he made very clear, and made it very clear that he was making it very clear in that speech just then. He said, we will not raise VAT, but by putting VAT on school fees, that is exactly what they are doing, because it is individual working people that end up going to pay that VAT. Now, the vast majority of parents, and I'm very grateful to so many of you that have left comments to the videos that I've spoken on this issue, and that is that so many parents, either themselves or someone they know, or they work in a school, there are so many of you that have commented that people work extremely hard. They make sacrifices. They don't have flashcards. They don't go on holidays. They don't have huge credit card bills and huge houses. They work hard and they make sacrifices to send their child to a private school for private education because they want to give them the best. Now, whenever I make comments on this, I always get at least one comment to say, I bet you went to a private school, referring to me, of course. Well, I didn't. I went to an old comprehensive school. And I regret that I did not have the opportunity to go to a private school. But now I very much support private education, and there are some starkly, in fact, I'm going to ask you to bear with me in this video. It's going to go on a little bit longer than I expected, but I'm going to jump over to a tweet that I commented on, where I said, and I mean this with respect, but it will be quite critical. I make no apology for being critical because I have to call it out where I see it. But an MP who is making an entirely incorrect statement, quite an insulting and incorrect statement. And I've just found it here now. This was from Zarah Sultana MP. Now, she's not the only one to have commented on this issue. It is a very divisive issue, which is one of the reasons I talk about it, because I like to give you both perspectives. And so on the one end of the scale, obviously you have schools like Eton, which are the most elite, the most expensive, and arguably you could say, yes, it is only the children of the most wealthy that are going to those schools. But a significant number of private schools are not like Eton. They are very much smaller. They do not have swimming pools. They do not have tennis courts. They don't even have proper sports halls. In fact, many of them will rent swimming pools to take children to swimming lessons. They will rent school halls from state schools just to do their PE lessons. They'll go and rent their rugby pitches to do their rugby and all that sort of stuff. So they are very much reliant, and they feed back into the state system to rent back those services, all of which are paid for, obviously, through fees by the parents sending their children to those private schools. But let's look at this tweet here by Zarah Sultana, which I think is hugely disrespectful and plain wrong, and frankly naive, with all respect. She says, private schools, which only 7% of children attend. Now, first of all, 7% is not a small number. If you were going for an operation and the doctors said to you, you have a 7% mortality rate, that means 7 out of every 100 people that take that operation do not survive. Those are not fantastic odds. 7% is a huge number. Percentages are a huge deal when it comes to looking at numbers like this. So 7% of children, we are looking at something in the region of 500,000 or 600,000 children. So it's not a small number at all. But then just to put back in context of what she says private schools divert resources from the state school system, which is frankly incorrect. Because, as I said in my response to this here, I said this is naive, and I mean this with great respect, but naive and misconceived comment on many levels. First of all, I said 7% is a huge number of children, many of whom will have their education disrupted. The current estimates on the reports are something up to 90,000 children that are going to be affected. And I'll pull up a calculator in a moment and we'll take a look at some numbers of what that might actually translate into when we look at what they might cost the state system. But a huge number nonetheless. I then said private schools do not divert resources from state schools. They are completely separate. The government is directly responsible for funding state schools, and they are directly accountable for any underfunding. It's not a case where you should be taking money from one part of the system and giving it to another, when the two are operating differently, and they should not be operating like that. And the next points are where she says the private schools entrench inequality from childhood and create and maintain privilege. And then she says taxpayers should not subsidise two-tier education system. Both of which are wrong, by the way, because I know children from state schools and I know children from private schools. They get along just fine. This is not an inequality and it is not a privilege between them for the vast majority of children that I know from both of those schools. And so my response to that is that taxpayers are not subsidising private schools any more than they're subsidising gambling or credit cards, and both of which are exempt from VAT. And children's wear, which I mentioned in a previous video, which are zero rated. Not the same thing, but zero rated for VAT. So taxpayers are not subsidising state schools. Just because currently they do not have VAT applied doesn't mean that the taxpayers are subsidising the private schools. Quite the reverse, in fact. The parents that send their children to a private school are paying their taxes into the system, which pay for the state schools, even though they are not taking up those state school places because their child is in a private school. However, if their child then moves into the state school, it's going to then end up costing the state system for their child as they move across. More about that in a moment. But then I also say many parents struggle, and this is a genuine thing that a lot of you have mentioned in the comments. Many parents struggle and make huge sacrifices to send children to private schools. It is grossly unfair, these are my comments, grossly unfair, inaccurate, and naive to call this an inequality. And I mean that both with respect, but with full vigour of the wording, because it is grossly unfair, because the parents that I know that send their children to a private school, many of whom make huge sacrifices in order to do so, and they are absolutely channeling all of their resources, working 2 or 3 jobs, channeling all of their money into that child to give them the best that they possibly can. That is not entrenching equality, as Zarah put it. It is not creating and maintaining privilege. It is simply parents doing the very best for their children. Now, some people also ask about taking their child out of school to take them on holiday and things like that, because many parents will take a child out of school to go on holiday the week before because it's cheaper and they want them to have the experience of holiday and so on. I'm not going to get into the debate as to whether that's right or wrong. Legally, it's wrong because you would need the school's permission to do so. Do I think it's right that parents are fined for doing so? No, I don't think that's right either. But do I think that they should be allowed to take them out? Well, personally, I think that if you're at school, that should be a commitment, and I'm a commitment kind of guy. I think if you are supposed to be in school, you're supposed to be in school. Just like if I'm supposed to be in work, I'm supposed to be in work. I've never worked for a company in my life. I started out with nothing. I built businesses, and I've always sort of forged my own way. I sacrificed holidays for 10 or 15 years to make my businesses work, and so I've made these sacrifices. I've absolutely I consider myself a working person. I work all hours. Anyone that knows me properly knows that I'm always working. And so going back to my previous comments, I consider myself a working person, even though I own businesses and I employ people. I've created jobs. I've created and contributed back to this economy, but I still consider myself a working person. And so I said that those comments were grossly unfair. And therefore, I concluded that this post by Zarah is misleading and itself, ironically, quite divisive. So a little bit of a diversion from the original subject of this video, but I hope you follow that argument a little bit. And maybe you can see now how it is, ironically, posts like this by MPs, no less, like this, that are arguing that this is a divide, and ironically, they are creating that divide themselves. It is those arguments that create this divide and give the impression of inequality and privilege that doesn't exist for the vast majority of these private schools. For some, I guess it does. I have no direct experience with schools such as Eton and so on. I can imagine that they are very elitist compared to the vast majority of others. That's not to say it's a bad thing, because I do support the choice for each parent to give the very best that they can for their child. And if that means a school that's so much more expensive than anyone else can ever possibly dream to afford, that is their choice, and that should be a choice for them to make. Should we be taxing it with VAT? No, I don't think we should, even at that top end. But even that is now falling to a backfire, because it appears that these reports have overlooked, at least from the reading that I've done, it appears that the reports into the to and fro and the costings, which I'll come to in just a moment, have overlooked the fact that some schools, the vast majority can't do this, but some schools like Eton can go back using the standard tax rules and go back for many, many years and reclaim the VAT on all of the stuff that they've not reclaim the VAT for now that they've newly registered. As I say, this doesn't work for the vast majority of schools, but those numbers seem to be overlooked. But if we take some raw numbers, for example, if we take the somewhat worst case scenario of 90,000 children, and if we say that they're going to cost the state system roughly £12,000 a year, I understand it's anything between £6,000 and £30,000 a year per child, depending on special education needs and so on. If we took a round figure of £12,000 per year per student, and the worst case scenario on the current reports of 90,000 children, we're looking at over £1 billion that's going to cost the state. And not to mention that those are obviously not going to be paying the VAT that they would have accounted for in the first place. So that's 90,000 odd students' places for whom their VAT fees are not going to be collected in this new system. So I think this is going to come crumbling down. If it goes ahead, indeed, I've still got some reservations about whether it will really go ahead or not. It looks really set to go ahead, but I still have some reservations as whether it will really go ahead. But if it really does go ahead, I've got a sneaky feeling this is going to come crumbling down, because there's lots of things like this. It's been rushed through. I don't think there's been a proper assessment. I don't think it's been properly costed. I don't think the numbers are right. I don't think the reports are right. I think they're relying on a report which itself doesn't seem entirely accurate. And even then, it seems to have overlooked some significant numbers which are going to skew the whole thing. So overall, I don't think it's going to work, even if it goes ahead. But as I say, let me know your thoughts and comments about anything that I've said in this video. I do aim to be non-partisan and give you both sides and both sides of the argument here. So here's to a greater Britain. Let's hope that things work out. But leave me your thoughts and comments below. But thank you for your time and attention. Please do like the video and subscribe to help my channel grow. And as always, thank you for watching.